So I just recorded most of the update. Well, recorded the audio, most of the update, and didn't start the video. And in the video, I started off by saying, look, I'm looking kind of disheveled for those of you who are watching the video, and unshaven because, frankly, I'm almost like trying to pretend I'm on holidays because I have got this 6-week period at home. Apparently that means I lose my mind and basic stuff like pressing the record button doesn't always work. So this one's going to be better because I've already practiced it once. So moving on, where I did start on that last one is to say, look, yes, I have been trying to take it just a little bit easier lately. I've just found that it's been a super intense year. I was looking at my travel stats the other day. They they sort of say I've got to stay home a little bit more. So as part of that, I'm just trying to, I guess, have a more semblance of a normal life. One of the things that's really hard with independence, and I'm sure it's the same for many people that are self-employed as well, is that the line between working and not working can be very blurry. So, you know, I'll get up in the morning. I normally get up at 5 something. I get up pretty early, in part because we don't have daylight saving in this state, which is a different issue. Confuses the cows. Anyway, so I get up pretty early, and you know, it's like from 5 something, I'm just sort of going through emails and tweets and stuff like that. And then, of course, there's life. There's I play tennis with the kids a lot. I take them to school. I do things throughout the day and pick them up and this kind of stuff. And then, you know, by the time the day ends, I'm still twittering and emailing and this sort of stuff. And it's very hard to know where things stop and start. So unless I sort of make a conscious effort to step away, it's actually very difficult. So today I did do that. I went jet skiing for a bit. In fact, and this is sort of the odd blend, I went jet skiing to an island so that I could have a meeting there. It was a meeting via phone. We do a Microsoft Regional Director thing once a month. And it's fun to be on a call like this and have people say, can you please mute your phone because we can hear the waves crashing in the background. It's not that it's annoying us, we just wish we weren't in the office. So that was cool. So I did that, came home and had a bit of a swim, hence the disheveled look. But of course, in amongst all those things, I have actually been trying to do my best to get a bunch of stuff done. Now, you may also hear a bunch of noise outside as well. We're doing a bunch of renovations, which again is sort of part of this I'm at home, let's like do normal homey things. So we've ripped out a garden, there's a new garden going in, and a whole bunch of other things happening as well that were just, you know, the things that will hopefully make the environment that much nicer to be in. And of course, then I need to make sure I'm at home and actually in the environment. So apologies in advance if there's jackhammering or angle grinding or things like that out the side. So I have actually been doing a bunch of stuff in the background, which is not immediately obvious. I haven't blogged this week. I do have a massive backlog of blogs. I've got so much stuff that I want to write and complete. But blogs tend to be something where I'll get an itch and I just want to sit down and I want to pump the thing out. And that just really hasn't happened in the last few weeks, mostly because of travel, obviously. But the things I have been doing is a lot of background stuff. And what I mean by that is, for example, a lot of stuff on Have I Been Pwned. So one of the things I've really been focusing on with Have I Been Pwned is moving more and more processing out of the app service and into functions. And if you recall, functions are Microsoft's serverless implementation, which in more practical terms is pay for the number of executions and pay for how long they take to run and pay for how much memory they use while they run. So very much sort of per consumption cost-based model. Now, one of the things that's really cool about this is that we can move away from the idea of having a logical container that is this big, which is what we used to call, or still call, an app service. So, you know, maybe you've got an app service with 4 cores and 8 gigabytes of RAM, and you always have this much, but you only might be using like this much, but you've got to pay for the whole thing because you've got the whole thing. And then you go over to here and it's just entirely elastic. It will stretch as far as you need to go without having to roll over into other logical containers, and you will pay for just what you use and never more. So that makes a lot of sense in terms of the financials and the management side of things. And I'll give you a really good example. I don't think I've spoken about this one before, except for in the video that didn't record just now. So emails. when Have I Been Pwned sends an email, for quite some time now, it's dropped it into an Azure storage queue. So for example, if you go to the notification service and say, hey, I would like you to notify me when I appear in a data breach, you get a response immediately, but all that's actually done is just drop the message in a queue. And then what used to happen is there'd be an Azure web job, and the web job would be triggered by a new queue item. It would pick up the message from the queue and it would send it via SMTP using the SendGrid service. Now, that for the most part worked well, but web jobs run in process of the app service. And what this means is that if you suddenly have to spin up a whole bunch of web jobs, you're loading up that app service with more and more cycles. So for example, if I was to load a new data breach and have 100,000 emails to send, and 100,000 emails suddenly get dropped, or at least messages get dropped in an Azure storage queue, every one of those starts triggering an Azure function. And an Azure function can only do so many of them simultaneously. I think I'm going to do about 25 per instance simultaneously. So it is going to process them in a somewhat sequential manner. But once you get enough of them spinning up, that starts using cycles on the parent app service. If it gets to the trigger thresholds for autoscale, then you get another container of app service. And what happens is you sort of like max out your capacity. You're using too much, so things are slowing down, and then it triggers, and eventually, and it does this in only like 5-minute increments too, so you can grow too quickly. It'll get like you just keep adding these big containers, and then it finishes when you're at like your absolute peak of containers, and then it slowly takes them away. And I realize I'm using the word container in ways that may be confusing. I am talking about a logical app service, not like a Docker implementation. But the fact that there is a logical kind of unit that is this big, and when you start using too much of it, you get another one that is the same size. So what happens now is that all of that code has been moved into an Azure function. So every time there's a new message in the queue for an email, it's triggering a function execution. And I can trigger as many of them as I want, and it has zero impact on the app service. It just keeps spinning up new functions. And you pay per execution and per however many seconds and gigabytes of RAM and so on and so forth. And they scale beautifully. They're just in an absolutely linear fashion, and it's never cost me just about anything to run them because it is just stupid how cheap they are. So look, I know I've spoken about it before. I'm going to be doing more writing, more speaking at events and other media bits and pieces and things coming up on what I've been doing with that as well, because it's so much fun. And the other cool thing about this as well is that the Have I Been Pwned implementation seems to be getting a lot of traction with people, not because of the security stuff, but because of the Azure patterns. So I turned on .NET Rocks for the first time in ages this morning, but I saw my podcast pop up and someone was talking about functions. And I was like, okay, well, I'm very interested in functions. I should listen to this. And within the first few minutes, they're talking about Troy Hunt's Have I Been Pwned use of functions. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. So it is honestly very, very fulfilling to see people take that pattern and then use that as a reference point. So, thank you to people that do share that. That's super cool. So that's the Have I Been Pwned side of things. There's still a lot of other stuff that's moving over. And the thing about it is that doesn't change anything for you insofar as you don't see anything work differently. Other than the fact that there are going to be much fewer times where there's any sort of performance latency or that sort of thing. It's mostly a difference for me so that I'm not getting alerts when CPUs are going out of control or instances are adding. And my bill's less. And that's really, really nice to have a lesser bill. So some of the things, though, that you may have seen on Have I Been Pwned if you're watching, I want to talk about a couple of data breaches. And first one I want to talk about here is Mac Forums. Now, Mac Forums is vBulletin. So it runs on vBulletin. Now, I have said many things about vBulletin in the past, and I want to sort of caveat this from the outset by saying I do not have an issue with vBulletin per se when I do this talk. What I have an issue with is people going and getting a software product and installing it and going, oh, this works good. This is nice. This is great for running a forum, and I can get all my, whoever to come along and sign up and create accounts, and then they don't do anything with it. And months and years go by, and there's vulnerabilities and updates and patches, and they don't do anything with it because it worked before. And this is why there's something like 44 different references of vBulletin on the pwned website's link on Have I Been Pwned. Have a look. It's just vBulletin all over the place. Now, I wrote some time ago about why I love managed services. And let's sort of quantify the difference here. If we're talking about vBulletin that someone goes and installs themselves and they run on their own VPS, they are responsible for maintaining it. If vBulletin releases a patch, they need to proactively go out there and get the patch and install it, otherwise they don't get the benefits of the patch. On the other hand, a managed service, and I believe vBulletin does provide managed services, as do many other providers. There is managed WordPress. I run my blog on managed Ghost. You go to one of these managed providers and you pay them inevitably a bit more than what it would cost if you did do this yourself on your own virtual private server. Although caveat there, many of these guys can really get economies of scale in terms of the way they stretch out their implementation, and they have thousands, hundreds of thousands of subscribers using it and actually do it very cost effectively. Regardless, let's imagine it does cost a little bit more. What you pay for is someone actually maintaining this stuff, applying patches, implementing security best practices, and all these other things. And it just makes enormously good sense. I'm going to link to a piece I wrote some time ago about what I do when managed services go down. And in fact, from memory, and I didn't look at this in the previous recording, but it's coming back to me now, one of the way I sort of phrased it is every now and then Ghost Pro, so the managed Ghost implementation has gone down, and TroyHunt.com has said, big sort of Ghost message, our servers are literally on fire. And the first thing that happens is people get very upset about the fact it says literally, because they go, well, no, that's not actually literally because there's not flames. And then the second thing is that I point them to the definition of literally, which now can mean metaphorically. True story. Nothing to do with InfoSec, but look it up. And then we sort of go in this blog post and make the point that when there is an outage, and there will always be outages, whether you manage it or someone else manages it, but when there are outages and there's like a dedicated professional team of people and all they do is manage this product, they're on the job and they're going to do a better job of fixing it than what I would, or probably than what you would. So basically the blog is full of shots of me like laying in the pool or on a beach or something like that, because this is what I do while they're trying to fix the service. It's not my responsibility. I can't do anything about it. And I'm quite happy not having not just that level of control, but level of responsibility. So that's interesting. I'm going to link to that. Now, just to sort of drill down on this. So, look, shit happens, right? Like sites get breached for whatever reason, one of them being that they haven't updated frameworks and they get owned. What do you do when it gets breached? This almost feels like a talk to my kids. What do you do in order to be a responsible citizen if you do harm to someone else? Well, you contact them and you let them know you're sorry. We call this data breach notifications. There is a slightly different approach to that here from the Mac Forum people. So I did attempt to contact them. I filled out their contact us form. I sent it off. I did not get a response. This data was being actively trading on a pretty well-known data breach hacking forum, which is basically just there for people to break into places and exchange data. If you're listening to this and you've visited such a place, you probably know which one it is. So anyway, the data's been posted there. It's now public. I ended up publishing it on Have I Been Pwned, sending out thousands of notifications because there were 300, I think it was about 326,000 email addresses in there. Have I Been Pwned's got going on 2.2 million subscribers now. So I'm often finding it's around about 1% of the total number of email addresses. That's how many notifications I end up sending out between individual subscribers and those monitoring domains. So of course, if I send out thousands of emails, someone sooner or later is going to pop up and say to the company, hey, by the way, you got owned. So I'm looking at the Mac Forums site here, and someone's started a new thread here. It says site was breached. I'll link to this in my notes. They said, just found this today in my email. There's a link to a JPEG, which I can't see if I don't have an account, which I don't, but inevitably they've linked to an image of the Have I Been Pwned notification. And administrators responded and they said, at the time of the alleged breach, the forum was owned by Penton, a large corporation. Now, I used to do a bunch of writing for Penton because Penton owns Windows IT Pro and other assets like that. and maybe they did own Mac forums. That's not something I was familiar with. We, the current owners, do not know if Penton responded or if they did anything at all. Now, honestly, I have a bit of a problem with this because it kind of doesn't matter what Penton did or did not do, because these guys have just discovered that the site that they now own and they're now responsible for had a data breach. So what do you think the right thing to do is? Well, the right thing to do is to let people know. Now, keep in mind as well, the classes of data compromised here. Usernames, email addresses, IP addresses, passwords as stored as salted MD5 hashes, so next to useless in terms of storage, they're going to get cracked in no time, and dates of birth. Because apparently you need to capture someone's date of birth, which remember is a knowledge-based authentication attribute, which is static, it cannot be changed. Apparently you need to capture that to talk about problems with your Mac. I don't know why they get that, other than the fact that vBulletin does it and someone hasn't turned it off, which is not a very good excuse. So there is personal data of a nature which could cause people harm, passwords and KBA data. So this administrator said this. Someone else chimes in after this, someone who's a senior member. That breach, if it actually did occur, well, yeah, it did occur because I got the freaking data. When I sent you the email about it, I sort of said, can I send you the data? And actually, I think what I did is I linked them to the forum which was sharing the data. So they could have gone there, grabbed the data and gone, oh yeah, it is our data. So they've not even done that. If it did actually occur, it was over 2 years ago, and I doubt you had anything of value to harvest with only 2 other posts according to your specs. Now, I do have a real issue with this, because what's happened here is someone has posted. Now, this person's been a member since July 2014. So before the alleged breach, which happened in 2016. Let's not say alleged, it's real. Before the breach, at the alleged time, which I believe was 2016. And I sort of, I think the file was named something that implied 2016, plus the data, things like dates and times, often indicate this too. So the premise that this person has only made 2 posts so they don't have anything like important is just ridiculous on multiple levels. Now, one of the levels is passwords are important because statistically that person has reused that password across a whole bunch of other services. And yes, I know they shouldn't do that, but they probably have. And now Mac forums, whoever owns it, has been the subject of a data breach and they've lost that data. And other people now have that password and it puts individuals at risk. And then there's the birth date thing. And then you know what, besides all of that, regardless of how long the person's been a member, how many posts they've made, anything like that, Mac forums lost the data. Other people had trusted them with the data. They stuffed something up, probably not updating their vBulletin. They lost the data. Take responsibility, for God's sake. Like it just drives me nuts the way responsibility is just like, I just don't get this. Anyway, someone else has chimed in here. I also received this email. I had to do the email verification password sending thing again, so I guess that password seems to have been reset, which is a good thing. Maybe they reset passwords. Well, if they did reset passwords, it would mean that they knew and didn't tell people, which kind of makes it even worse. Anyway, last thing by, let's see, there's actually senior member here. So senior member says it's, I don't even understand. Look, I'll link to this. I just don't even understand what the point of the rest of this thread is, other than this original person, actually someone else trying to get their data deleted. And when they tried to get their data deleted, administrator said, only an administrator can remove your account from our database. If you really wish this to occur, let me know in your reply and I'll remove your account. Okay, well, at least they offered to remove the data, which is a good thing. So that was Mac Forum. Now the other one here was, how do we say this? Joomla. So this is not an issue with Joomla itself, rather with a service which creates templates and so on for Joomla. And what seems to have happened here is this service has acquired 2 other services, one called iJoomla and one called Jom Social. They've acquired these services last year, and as part of the rollover process, have created a Jira ticket saying, can you please migrate the accounts from the old services into the new service? And by the way, in the Jira ticket, here is a CSV, 2 CSVs actually, one for each one of those services, with all the usernames and passwords and everything else in it, like the raw data. MD5 from memory? I've got all MD5 hashes. And the Jira ticket was accidentally public. And it got indexed by Google. People found it. Someone who found it then sent me the data, and now here we are. Now, to Joomla Art's credit, I contacted them via the Contact Us form on their website and also via Facebook Messenger, and both channels replied within low single-digit hours. So really, really responsive. Good on them for that. Take note, Matt Keeper. This is how you respond to data breach disclosure. So they responded very quickly. Fortunately, only like 22,000 records in there. But I just thought it was interesting the way they got exposed. Public Jira tickets with don't do that. But also interesting the way they responded. So, good on them for that bit. All right, now, on to something a bit different. Earlier this week, I tweeted and I said, look, does anyone have a contact at Google? I'm trying to help a relative recover a Gmail account which they've been locked out of. And first of all, so there was a bit of a theme of replies, which was people sort of going, yeah, Troy shouldn't get special treatment to like circumvent process to get an account recovered or something. And like, let's just be clear, it is not that. And I said in multiple responses, I said, I don't want to circumvent process. I just want to know that someone is looking into this and it hasn't fallen to the bottom of some like massive account recovery queue, because there's going to be a gazillion people out there trying to do dodgy things. And fortunately, someone from Google did actually get in touch with me and they helped me recover the account for this relative. And it was interesting sort of pulling this thing apart, figuring out what had gone wrong, and also, and this is sort of the point I want to make in this weekly update, that the pennies that dropped around just how freaking hard it is to do account management right online today. And what we eventually discovered with this is that someone had actually signed into an online service using Google as auth. Now, this will sort of give you an idea of how confusing it was. This was a website where they could organize some holiday stuff. They already had an account on there that they had created with their Gmail account. So, go to the website, create a new account, here's my Gmail address, here's a password. They had subsequently gone to sign in on the mobile app, and the mobile app gave them an option to sign in with Google. Now, when I see that, and probably when you see that as well, we know that this is the Google OAuth dance. This is the one where you can actually authenticate to Google, and then you effectively get a token which allows you to authenticate rather than having to create a separate account. But to them, they're going, well, yes, actually, I would like to log in with Google because I use my Google account. You see where the thing starts to come off the rails? Now, So that bit we managed to sort of get to the bottom of. And that alone is confusing, because create an account and use my Gmail as the username and then create my own password is different to log on to Google and do the OAuth dance. Right at the time they did this, right at the time they gave this app permissions, and in fairness, all this app wanted to do was effectively view their public information and get their name back. So it wasn't like send email on your behalf or anything kind of screwy like that. But right at the same time, after we gained access to the account, we saw that the password had actually been changed at the same time. This is super weird. It is possible that they inadvertently changed their password. And actually, now that I think about it more, maybe they took the password that they used when they created the account on this third-party service, and when they had successfully logged on to Google, they actually changed their Google password to this one. We never actually tried using the password from the other service on Google. But effectively, they changed their Google password, couldn't get back onto Google, tried to do account recovery. The email address which was on there for account recovery was the old email address that they had before they moved to Gmail and they no longer had access to. And this is what effectively had us logged out of the account. Now, as part of the process of logging back in, there are also considerations such as 2FA. Now, this was 2FA via Google sending an SMS. Yes, we know the problems with SMS and 2FA, but it is still 1 point something FA. It's still another factor. It's better than a password alone. But, this sort of made it tricky. Fortunately, I still had the phone, so I could get the SMSs. But it made it tricky as well when we went through and reset everything else up again, because it's like, we need one phone which is for recovery email, or for if you need to recover, and then a different phone for effectively your 2FA. By the way, if you want to go hardcore, you can always go and get a YubiKey and do that. And as you go through this process, for me as someone that like lives and breathes and thinks this the whole time, I found it confusing. And this is not a slight against Google by any means. because if I go through the same process with Microsoft or Apple or anyone else, every time I do it, it's like, this is different to the other companies. So everyone's got a different process, a different set of options about the way you do account security. Recovery processes are different. 2FA is different. If you get locked out of the account and you lose something like your Authenticator app, the way you get back into that is different. And it is just an absolute mishmash of different ways of doing things like authentication and proving identity. And it is freaking hard. And you can see why time and time again people don't use these additional security features. Dropbox allegedly has about, in fact, not just allegedly, I've seen Dropbox people themselves say this, they've got an uptake of 2FA of 1%. Like 1% of people. Because it is hard. And when you do get more people signing up, then they get more support queries because people get locked out because they've lost their Authenticator app and they never saved recovery codes as well. And even then, like you get back into Google and you get the account created. And this person was like, okay, well now I'm using Outlook on Windows 10. Well, you can't use your Google account. You've got to go and create an app password. so you can't sign in with your Google username and password because Outlook can't do the 2FA dance that Google wants. So you've got to go and get an app password, and then you've got to remember that. And then, of course, that signed them out of the iPhone and the iPad, so they had to go and re-log into there. But fortunately, that did have native support for Google 2FA, so you can actually go to a Google page when you add it into an iOS device and go through that, and it's a little bit easier. But just explaining it sounds confusing, right? And I guess the point I'm making here is I'm increasingly sympathetic to normal everyday people in terms of just how hard it is to do this stuff right. I myself somehow ended up needing to do account reset on a fairly important account of mine only last night. And myself going through this process again, and there's no indication whatsoever I had to do with security. It was just because I was mucking around with devices and kind of locked myself out. But even then, it's like, this is just a non-trivial thing. And I've got a pretty good idea of what I'm doing. So if I struggle to wrap my head around it, like, what's it like for normal people? And the funny thing is that a lot of people seem to think this is easy. And they'll go, oh, look, it's easy, like 2FA, you get your phone, the QR code, boom, into the app, you open up Authy, you get the number, you put that in, and you do all this sort of stuff. It's simple. When you sit down and you walk a non-technical person through it, not just the difficulty of explaining it in ways that people can understand, and again, like I spend my life trying to figure out how to explain complex technical things to people, whether they be developers or security people or my mum and dad. So like I give this a lot of thought and I find it hard. It's not just that, it's then if I go away, can they do this on their own? And it is enormously difficult. Even helping my wife set this stuff up, and she's very technical. Like if she has to go and sign back into stuff, it's often extremely confusing what the process actually is. And look, this is just a spray of words. I've not given this a whole lot of forethought in terms of constructing this in a way that explains it properly. Maybe this is a thing I'll get passionate about and blog about because it is freaking difficult. But this is something that just consumed a bunch of my time this week trying to help this person out. And then this is sort of the realization I came to. Now, still on the subject of things related to passwords and bits and pieces. In case of, like if you're watching this video and goes, why is Troy squinting and looking all over the place? As part of like just stupid, normal, everyday technical things going wrong, for some reason, out of my 4 monitors, this one today, after my PC crashed for unexplained reasons, has decided to revert to 640 by 480 res, and I cannot make it any higher even after updating drivers. So I've got to blow some time on that. And the laptop that's sitting there on the bench, for some reason, the SSD seems to be a little bit loose, so it keeps rebooting, which is not good. And I pop the back off it, and oh my God, if I go in there, I don't know if anything's ever going to work again because it is so compactly pressed in. Anyway, enough of my first world woes there. Back onto what I was looking for here. The ICO, Information Commissioner's Office in the UK, has recently put out some guidance. Oh boy, now my Twitter didn't load. Now it's loaded. Recently put out some guidance, very, very recently, within the last 24 hours, I believe, around passwords in online services. And interestingly, this is, I'm looking at the cookie trail here, this is down underneath the section on GDPR. And then the first bullet point says, although the GDPR does not say anything specific about passwords, you are required to process personal data securely, etc., etc. Now, the ICO actually reached out to have a bit of a chat about this a few weeks ago, and I'm sure they reached out to other people as well. And essentially what they wanted to do is prepare guidance that could be used by people building systems. So if you're building a system, what are the things that you should be thinking about in terms of the way you accept and manage passwords? And I bulleted just a few of them here earlier today, and it's things like don't block paste. Like, I know this is like one of these things that's profoundly obvious, but it's still a problem. And it seems like every other day this last week, I have quote tweeted some bank, usually in the UK, thanks very much guys for the continued entertainment, about how a bank is justifying, look, you can't paste passwords because security. Anyway, the ICO goes on. Allow special characters. Obvious one, but here we are. Recognize the problem with complexity rules. So one of the things that they talk about here, and this is what I love as a general theme in the industry at the moment, is we're getting away from just looking at the pure mechanical, technical side of security. So what I mean by this is take passwords. Mathematically, the longer it is, the broader the range of characters, the stronger it is. So consequently, you get password strength calculators that look for things like uppercase, lowercase, non-alphanumeric, all this sort of stuff. And people get told to adhere to these patterns. So in order to do that, they just replace like all their O's with the zeros, and apparently the organizations giving this guidance think the hackers haven't worked it out. But they have. So yeah, guidance like that. So that they're saying, look, this is the problem with complexity rules. And I felt the tone was a little bit more subtle than the likes of NIST and even the NCSC, insofar as, I forget which one of those it was, but one of them was pretty explicit, saying do not implement arbitrary complexity rules. The ICO is a little bit more like, just be conscious it may not do exactly what you think it should do. Only expire passwords if absolutely necessary. Again, consistent guidance with what we've seen from the likes of the NCSC. And I use their quotes in many of my talks because it just blows people's minds, because they're like, weren't we always meant to change passwords in case a hacker gets it? Now, there are many, many reasons why that doesn't make sense. And I'm going to just put a little note here in my notes so I remember to include my Authentication Evolved post, which talks about a whole bunch of modern guidance around how we should be creating passwords and things online, or rather how we as developers should be building systems to allow people to create passwords. So I'll put that in the references because that is, again, consistent with all this. Blacklist weak and leaked passwords. If only there was a place to get those from. So obviously that is consistent with NIST guidance. So when NIST released a bunch of their identity guidance, was it last year or the year before? Recently. One of the things they said is, look, if there have been passwords from previous breach corpuses, you should block those. That was the genesis of Have I Been Pwned's Pwned Password service, which has been used to great effect by the likes of GitHub and EVE Online. So I'm happy to see that. Now, one of the things which flows quite nicely from the last section about the difficulty this relative had of mine, or of mine had of getting back into their account, is someone replied to this thread where I've said, look, you know, I love this guidance from the ICO. They've said, ask everyone for their public signing key, have the service generate long password and deliver it encrypted to the user. And this may have been tongue-in-cheek, but you know, they're sort of saying, look, there are technically much better ways of doing this than passwords. And of course they're right. There are much, much better technical ways of doing authentication than trying to ask people to remember secrets in their head, which is where most people store their secrets. The thing is, though, is that we just had this discussion about how hard it is for normal people to grok even things like 2FA via an SMS or something. So to think that anyone can even get their head around the idea of a public signing key that is a normal mere mortal, it's hard enough for enough technical people. Like that just doesn't fly. And for all their faults, the thing that passwords does better than anything is usability. And what I mean by that is that everyone knows how to use it. And I know it's a little bit crap to have to enter them, so maybe, strictly speaking, UX is not particularly friendly. But from the perspective of what is a means of authentication that everyone knows how to use, passwords do that. And we're trading off between the security-minded folks amongst us going, there are all these technical controls we have now to make security better. And the other side, which is like, we've actually got to get people to sign up to our platform and buy our product. Otherwise, we don't make any money and all you security people are out of a job. So it's an interesting sort of nexus here. And it is the same with things like knowledge-based authentication questions. Your birthday has been leaked all over the place. Thank you, Mac Forums. But everyone knows their birthday. And if a website or some service wants to verify someone, verify them, air quotes for the podcast listeners, by asking their birth date, everyone knows how to provide it. Everyone knows how to provide their mother's maiden name. They're terrible from a security perspective, but they're fantastic from the perspective of everyone knows how to use it. So that's those guys. Now, two more things. I tweeted this week a photo. I've actually been, as I mentioned, I've been trying to actually do like some normal family and dad stuff and around the house stuff, part of which included cleaning up my cupboard. I hung up all the passes from conferences that I've received over the last several years, mostly the last several years. And there's around about 120 different conference badges here. It looks very impressive in my cupboard. It does actually sit around in my cupboard. I don't particularly want them hanging around out here in the office. And in no particular order, there's just a heap of stuff there that when I look back at on the screen now, it's like, yeah, there's some pretty cool memories. And someone actually, they asked me, in fact, what was the tweet? They said, the tweet's dropped off now. But they said something along the lines of what was the memorable one. So, out of 120 odd conferences, what was memorable? And I had a bit of a think about it before I sat down to record this. And I thought of three that were particularly memorable for different reasons. And the first one was NDC Oslo in 2014. And the reason for that is that for me was, and maybe this is a good blog post actually, but it was sort of the point where things really changed in my outward-facing life and my life of independence. So I was still employed at Pfizer back then. It was not until January after that, so NDC is always June, so 7 months later I got the redundancy from Pfizer. But I remember when I was in Oslo, it was my first international speaking event. Actually, it might have been my second. I had earlier that year done Code Mania in New Zealand, but New Zealand doesn't really count. Kiwis will understand. So it was the first big one. So thousands of people, massive event. It to me was like, wow, I've kind of made it as a speaker if I can go to the other side of the world and be invited to do this event. So it was very, very exciting in that regard. I'd never been to Norway either. And that was really significant. And there's a couple of really lasting memories from that. And one was that the talk absolutely smashed it. 100% positive feedback. I've got a photo summary, just a box of green cards. So NDC, there's always green, yellow, and red cards. Self-explanatory. Everyone walks out, drops in the box. 100% positive feedback. Everyone loved it. Organisers loved it. And I've had a really close relationship with those guys ever since. So that was really cool. And the other thing that was really memorable was that it was, as much as that was a high point, it was also sort of a low point in terms of how I felt about my corporate job. And I remember sitting in a hotel with Niall Merrigan. Some of you know Niall. He's another very notable speaker. Great bloke, very good mate. And was sitting in a hotel there, and I was just, it was like literally drowning sorrows. I was so depressed about my corporate life. And it was only 12 months after that I was out of there and well and truly into independence and just on a totally different track. So, that was sort of that really pivotal moment for me, where it was the lowest of the low for corporate and then the highest of the beginnings of the high for independence. So that was one. Another one that really stood out was Pluralsight Live, which was September last year, and this was in Utah, and this was really noteworthy for several reasons. I actually didn't give this much thought just before right now, other than just jotting it down. So yeah, Pluralsight Live was just a massive event. I think they had about 1,500 odd people there. I did a keynote. On the same stage as Michelle Obama, which was like, oh man, that's pretty awesome. It was also the same stage as Scott Guthrie and Joel Spolsky. And the very first blog post I ever wrote about why online identities are a smart career move. In that post, I said, look, I don't ever plan to be an identity like Scott Guthrie or Joel Spolsky. And then I ended up on the same stage as both of them. And I actually only realized that only a few months ago, where it was like, wow, that's actually really kind of poignant. So yeah, that was a huge thing, and it was just an epically massive stage as well. Like there's a bunch of photos and things out there. In fact, the talk is recorded online as well. I should link to that. And it was just this ginormous, massive stage. Everything behind me was like LCD screens that just showed like amazing different images and colors and just totally changed the mood of the room. And the talk just went fantastically well with great feedback too. And then the third one, and this pass is actually in this picture here. For anyone that looks at it, it's the dodgy looking one towards the left. It says H232 November 3, 2017, was testifying in front of Congress. Now, okay, I know that's not a conference, but I got a pass. I kept it. It's on the list. And, you know, even if, like, this was November, Pluralsight Live was September, so even just a couple of months earlier, I never would have expected to have done the Congress thing. So to have ended up, I guess, just individually as a professional there in Congress was a massive thing, but to do that off the back of running a freaking data breach service, you know, like that is, I never expected that. It was only earlier last year I was really worried about the viability of the service in terms of the different sort of shady operators that were in the industry that I thought would possibly bring some regulatory weight down on the whole thing. So to end up in front of congressmen and congresswomen talking about being pwned was like, wow, that was some next level shit I did not expect. So look, there's plenty of others, and I'm sure that maybe there's a blog post in this one day about the really notable events and things. But if you have questions about that, send them through. All right, one more thing. And I was actually going to write a blog post about this, but I've just run short of time. Why no HTTPS? I have just updated the data. I'm going to get the data published before I publish this video. I've only very, very briefly looked at it. Now, if you recall, Why No HTTPS is a project that Scott Helm and I put out a few months ago. It uses his Alexa crawl data. So every night he goes and he looks at the Alexa top 1 million, which sites are redirecting to HTTPS, which ones are not, and a bunch of other really interesting security stuff. He has all of this data up at crawler.ninja. Yes? Oh, crap. So my PC just blue screened. I don't know what's going to happen to my Audacity audio. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this video. I'm going to see if I can recover that audio, and if not, I'll figure out what to do. And if I do recover it, I'm going to come back and I'm going to keep recording. Bear with me. This day is just not my friend. Fortunately, Audacity saved the audio. So big thumbs up to Audacity. But yeah, like the total PC just completely blue screened, and I normally run Audacity, which is recording off for those who can see the video, the mic just here, so that I have a nice clean audio track and obviously video off the iPhone. So Audacity saved that. I might have just lost a tiny fraction off the end of it. You probably would have heard once I edit this up, it'll go from good mic to iPhone mic, but yeah, here we are. Let's get on with it. So I really just want to get it through so I can go and I think I just want to lay in the pool and drink beer. That may be my Friday afternoon yet. It is a possibility. So why no HTTPS? Now, Scott and I stood this up in wake of Google Chrome starting to indicate all non-secure sites as being non-secure, which seems fair enough, despite what some people think. Another story. So very, very occasionally we update it. And what I mean by that is it's an irregular cadence. And it was September when I last updated it. I know some stuff had changed. In fact, I even had the ABC in Australia, which, I'm going to check now because this will be interesting. The ABC in Australia was one of the largest offenders in Australia. Now I can't find my mouse. Where is it? There it is. So if I go back and what I'm going to do, I'm going to look at the live website over there and my laptop over here, which has got the effectively the preliminary data on it. The ABC was Australia's #1 non-HTTPS website. And someone from there actually contacted me probably a couple of weeks ago now and said, hey, we just updated. Could you please update your website? And look, I had to sort of say, look, well, you know, we don't have a strict timeline for it, busy, etc. But I thought this was awesome because this is precisely the behavior you're trying to drive. Obviously, the ABC was aware they were on this list. They felt bad about it. They really wanted to get themselves off the list. Fantastic. This is the exact shaming effect that we had hoped for. I've written before about why shaming is a good thing. I will not deal with that as a negative term. I think it is a very positive thing when it leads to change like this. which it clearly has. Now, very, very preliminary looks at what has actually changed. One thing is I have put all this data in GitHub now, so I will be tweeting about this later on. I actually I rejigged a few things. So basically all the data on this website is just driven off JSON files. The JSON files sit in Azure blob storage. When the website runs, it picks it up, generates the page, and then Cloudflare just caches the bejesus out of it. And Americans keep getting upset when I say cache. I think British people get upset when I say cache. And they say, no, it's cache, as if there's different letters in it. Anywho, you know what I mean. So the point is it's driven off JSON files. I made a few tweaks. So I've actually ordered the JSON files by domain rather than rank, simply so that it's easier to see from version to version which domains no longer exist, as opposed to them just being reordered because the Alexa order has changed. So what I've done is I've put in a public GitHub repository. I've put in the last version of the data and today's version of the data. I'll push all that before I tweet this later on. So you can compare yourself what has changed from one version to the last. Looking at the homepage, the immediate thing that I noticed on the homepage is that on the live site at the moment, it says the 100 websites below represent 21% of the world's largest 485 websites. So we got all the way down to 485 to get 100 websites that didn't redirect to HTTPS. Now it's 560. So it's going to be another 75 websites down the order before you get the first 100. So obviously we're taking websites out of that lower order, which is fantastic. This is what we want. Looking at the results, having really not looked at them before now, there's the lower order stuff, like not much stuff appears to have changed. What I really need to do, and of course I have to open all this up again because my entire screen be sorted. If I have a look at the GitHub repository here and I have a look at the top 100 sites, just a few different things have changed here. So 4chan, that's interesting. 4chan is now off the list. So 4chan previously wasn't redirecting. Now it is. So good on 4chan. They're off there. Alibaba is off there as well, which is really good. What else has changed here big time that I recognize? Interestingly, just eyeballing the list, still a massive number of Chinese websites. If I look at the previous data, what will be the previous data by the time you look at this, we've got Chinese websites in position 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then a whole bunch of them a little bit further down as well. We've still got them in 1, 2, 3 now. We've actually got an Indonesian news site in number 4, Tribune News. But there's also an interesting thing here. If I pop open Tribune News in the browser, no, that is actually insecure. Scratch that. The interesting thing, I will talk about other sites with in a moment. BBC.com is still one of the big ones. The BBC.com has got an American flag next to it. People get upset about that. This is not bbc.co.uk, which does redirect. This is the American-centric version of the BBC. I believe they're sort of managed by different people, different sort of processes and security postures. Still no excuse, but don't confuse the two BBCs. Google.cn, this one always strikes me as just like, I know why Google does the China thing and why they curtail to Chinese demands, but it just feels uncomfortable that we've got Google.cn, you know, a freaking Google TLD domain sitting there not redirecting to HTTPS. And when you pop it open, fun fact, it looks like a search page. It's just an image. Because China? I don't know, lots of weird China stuff. What else is on the list here that's changed or not changed fundamentally? A whole bunch of ranks changed. The Alexa ranking changes pretty much on a daily basis, as best I understand it. But again, the raw data will be there, so you guys can go and have a look at it. We're getting, obviously, some new sites in there because either some of the lower ranks have dropped down and then there's new stuff, you know, a bit further down. Or some of the lower stuff has just been removed completely because they have now gone HTTPS, which of course is the whole objective of the whole thing, which is where we want to go. Oh, look at this, sex.com. So sex.com has dropped off the list. Now this is interesting because a lot of adult websites are redirecting to HTTPS. I know that things like YouPorn were big news a little while ago when they went HTTPS. And they're big news because they're very, very large websites where there is also a higher expectation of privacy. Like regardless of where your moral compass sits on pornography, everyone would acknowledge that when people use that sort of site, they probably have a higher expectation of privacy than on Stack Overflow. Now, let's have a look at some of the movers and shakers country by country. Let's do Australia, UK, and US, because I do want to wrap this up, but they are my three biggest audiences. And we already know that Australia, the ABC, will have dropped off, which is really good news. I'm really happy about that. So ABC is now off the list. BOM, our Bureau of Meteorology, that is still on the list. So BOM, yeah, that is now Australia's largest insecure website. Alexa rank 4,177. Whirlpool.net.au has dropped off the list. Good on them. The guy responsible for Whirlpool was not real happy about this list because he had some counter arguments, which frankly showed he didn't really understand the problem that was underlying it. They've obviously fixed it up, so look, good on him. Kudos, man. This is what we want. We want to get people off the list. We want the numbers here, the ranks, to be as high as possible, so the more important stuff gets HTTPS. I guess conspicuous by its presence are things such as UQ.edu, the University of Queensland, number 2 in Australia. It's an education facility. ANU, the Australian National University in Canberra, that's in there in position 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's not great. We've got several other .edus.aus there within the top 20. Few little odd things. So here's a good one. Kmart in Australia. Now actually, let me check if this is a good example. Right, Kmart. When I click on Kmart in the browser, I end up on HTTPS. Now I wanted to sort of validate this because there's a lot been written about this. So I will link to previous posts on how we actually calculate this and why some stuff is on the list when people think it shouldn't be, etc., etc. But what it boils down to is that if the crawler does a search, rephrase that, if the crawler makes a request to the domain over HTTP and it is not 301 to HTTPS, if not on the first redirect, then on the subsequent redirect, then that is bad, it makes the list. When I look at something like Kmart, I get an HTTP 200 when I do a search from the crawler. That then has, what do we got here? We've got a script tag. Now that script tag may then contain JavaScript, which redirects it. And interestingly, I can see this is this script source refers to Encapsula, so they might be using Encapsula and doing some reverse proxy kind of funkiness there. Maybe there's some security stuff here. Bottom line is the site is not redirecting, it's serving up content over HTTP. This also means that it's not eligible for HSTS preload, because for HSTS preload, you must 301 that first request. So that's on the list. Chegg, here's another interesting one. So Chegg.com is one of the big ones on the global list. That does a 301 to, if I make a request for Chegg.com, it 301s to www.chegg.com, which then 403s. Now, it doesn't 403 in the browser, but if I take a look at the web view here in Fiddler, please verify you're a human. So basically, it's just 403 to an insecure page with a reCAPTCHA on it. Lastminute.com was another noteworthy one. In fact, I think that was a noteworthy UK one. That then comes back, does 403 access denied. You do not have permission. So inevitably, there's some anti-automation stuff or other kind of reverse proxy WAF kind of features in here that are trying to separate maybe bots from humans, malicious from good traffic, etc. I understand why people want to do that. I use Cloudflare to do precisely that. But you must 301. So they will stay on the list until they can do that properly. Now, looking at those countries, so we kind of covered Oz, again, big movers there, abc.net.au, Whirlpool's moved. We've still got stuff like Fox Sports on there, still got Weather Zone, still got a lot of universities, still got AFL, the Australian Football League, which is massive in Australia. So they need to kind of get their act together there. Let's just type in .gb. We'll have a look at the Brits just for a moment, and I'll do the same over here on my new version. What's changing in the UK? Incidentally, if you look at Scott's raw data, because again, I'm publishing the raw data into GitHub, and you look at the website and you go, oh, some stuff doesn't necessarily look like his raw data is reflected here. There are a small number of exceptional cases where I have overridden his crawler because I have been able to get a successful 301 when I've used it. again, I'll link to the original post and all the comments. This is by no means an exact science, but there were some very large noteworthy sites where I knew if I had them on this list when my experience was a 301 and anyone else, maybe just in Australia, was testing this and got a 301, it'd cause more dramas. So I do have the ability to override this. Now, in the UK, so on the list before, Lad Bible, Lad Bible's now number one. So Lad Bible is still the number one non-HTTPS website. And just a quick sanity check, even in the browser, definitely still over HTTP. What did drop off the number one list, or number one position here, was clearload.bid. And just eyeballing it, that doesn't appear to be down any lower as well. So if I check the old list, what does clearload do? Name can't be resolved. Am I pie-holing it? Because .bid almost sounds like it's going to be... No, I have my pie-hole disabled at the moment because I didn't want it to get in the way of tests like this. All right, so I'm not quite sure what clearload.bid is. What else? Daily Mail. Daily Mail, has that dropped off? Now, incidentally, I know how most of my followers feel about Daily Mail because I get told about it if ever I link to anything on there. They do have HTTPS now, so good on them for that. That's good. Or they got a DigiCert certificate. DigiCert is sponsoring this week, so that was timely. We'll get back to DigiCert. What else have we got here? Cambridge.org. Now, I'm not sure. Apparently, Cambridge.org is not the university, but it's the bookstore. And they seem to be going to HTTPS. So that's actually Cambridge University Press. So Cambridge has dropped off as well. I'm not going to go through all of these again. You guys have got the raw data. You go and have a look at that and do a nice little diff there in GitHub if you would like to see what's changed. Let's have a quick look at the US. So number one before was ESPN. ESPN is still number one. Wikia.com is still number two. BBC.com is still number three. Wow. Why does this all look identical? Is it really? Wow, 250, 265. I wonder, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to give this this IIS a little reboot because it does do some in-process caching here. So I'm not sure if that was the underlying reason for this, but on the surface of it, all this data is coming back the same. So let's just give this a quick refresh because otherwise that was just alarmingly consistently the same. So this is actually a good example that shows something kind of different here, which is that this is why it's not automated. Like, I'm just not confident enough that automating this will consistently get the right, accurate results. And as I look at this now, I don't know why this one is identical to this one. And in fact, what I can do is I can go and look at the raw JSON and see if it looks any different for the US. Otherwise, that'll be where I stop and go, let's take this offline and figure out what's gone wrong. Well, you know what? That is interesting. What about 4chan? There is another possibility here. So 4chan was on the list at rank 631. And if I look at my list over there, here, 4chan, in my new data is 631 as well, but it has definitely changed. So the old one should have been 631, the new one should be 49. So what might have happened is I did actually publish all of this data into Azure Blob. So basically all of this data, once it actually goes up into the live website, goes into an Azure Blob. And it sits on the Azure Blob, drives the live website, gets cached massively by Cloudflare, and then it barely touches the blob. So it's possible that I didn't actually upload the US Azure Blob. And again, as a reminder of why I want to validate this data as well. So I'll fix the US, and then you guys can go and have a look at that later on and figure out what's changed. So that's it. Like this was like take 1.5, 2 by the time I didn't record the first time, and then the whole thing crashed. So I would really like to actually get this editing and go and grab that beer in the lazy pool. But as I mentioned just before I go, DigiCert has been sponsoring my blog this week. They've got a piece here around RSA and ECC won't last forever. We're getting a head start on quantum-proof security now. And the quantum side of things is enormously interesting. It does significantly change the game. So it might be worthwhile checking out what DigiCert has to say around the impact of quantum computing on our cert things. Thank you very much for watching and for bearing with me. Obviously, this was a bit of a tumultuous update, and I hope that the reasons why I'm trying to take things a little bit easier at the moment kind of make sense as well. I'll come back to you next week. Who knows what will happen between now and then, but hopefully the computer things will just get a bit more reliable. Thanks, guys. See ya.